Jason back here with you for another episode of Sound Off Extra on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off podcast. My guest today is a writer and producer. He spent many years working with WWE, Ring of Honor, and TNA, which he called home for 5 years before leaving in November. Certainly not the only one to leave TNA of late. Most recently, this man has turned to directing, working with Billy Corgan on a YouTube series called 30 Days, where they hit the road and document Billy's journey across the country for an entire month. Dave Lagana joins me. Dave, how are you, sir?
Hello, and it's not TNA anymore, it's Impact Wrestling.
Ah, thank you for correcting me.
I couldn't figure it out in 5 years, but I think they finally have figured it out 5 years later. Wow.
There was something I just learned about you I wanted to bring up before we get into all the wrestling. Nothing salacious, but is it true that you once wrote an episode of Friends?
Yes. A long time ago in the year 2000, which was an old Conan sketch. It was, I was 24. I think I told this story on JR's. People always ask, how did you get to WWE? I got there by applying, but you know, I hustled as far as keeping moving in jobs. I got to Hollywood when I was 20, and I had 10 jobs in 5 years. I just kept moving around until I found what worked for me, and I was working at Wolfgang Petersen's production company, the guy that directed Das Boot and The Perfect Storm. And one day this woman came in as a temp, and she's like, "Oh, you're a writer. Well, they're looking for somebody at Friends if you wanted to be like a writer's assistant." I'm like, "Yes, please." And so they're like, "You just need to type fast. That's it. That's all. Like the job. Like, yeah, you need to type 89 words a minute." So I went home. I took a typing test. I was 76, so I spent the weekend sharpening my skills. And yes, it's a lucky break by typing fast, but sometimes you have to be ready with such stuff like that. So that's how I got on the staff. And then every year they would give the writer's assistants a script. And mine came in May of 2000.
It's one of those quirky things I didn't know, and I just happened to see. I said, I got to ask him about that, because I think it was just the one episode?
Yeah, I was only there for the one season. Like wrestling promotions, when executive producers or people change, they sort of bring in their own staff. And there was a changeover, and I was not retained, and I moved on to another show a couple weeks later with the executive producer of Mad About You, a guy by the name of Vic Levin, who taught me a lot about hard work and, you know, being committed to your job and all that stuff. So it actually was, I actually enjoyed that job more than Friends, which I know people will think is weird, but I learned more and I got to do more on that job.
Now, are you originally from Long Island?
No, I'm from a small town over the bridge from Philadelphia. I grew up 10-minute drive from the ECW arena. Okay. Which it wasn't ECW arena when I was born, but that's where I lived.
Yeah, I'd seen conflicting things. I saw something about Long Island and then Philly, so I wanted to clear that up at first. So I wasn't sure which. Well,
I consider myself Philadelphia. So like anytime if I reference wrestling growing up, it was always Philadelphia.
Was it primarily WWE? I mean, did you watch any other stuff, or was that pretty much what you were in tune with?
We got real lucky. Philadelphia always sort of got everything. So I had cable. I had cable starting in 83 or 84. I discovered wrestling in 85. So I'd get Crockett on TBS. We would get, I guess it was called Worldwide, on Channel 17 in Philadelphia, which was the NWA syndicated show. We would get the two Wrestling Challenge and Superstars. And then on this, I think it's 56 or 57, I can't remember what the number was, on Saturday nights we would get World Class and UWF. So I saw everything. And then AWA was on ESPN, and yeah, it was, and World Class I think was on ESPN. I always get that mixed up, but yeah, I saw everything. And then I was a big magazine guy. And if you followed me on Twitter over Christmas, I started digging through all my old magazines and all my old action figures. So I really geeked out over the holiday.
Yeah. Well, I got a whole stack of the old WWF magazines sitting in a closet somewhere. I intend to hold on to that as long as I possibly can.
The longer you hold on to that Brother Love issue, the less valuable it becomes.
Well, you know, the Brother Love one is one I don't have. I think I started in the beginning of 92. I think I just missed the Brother Love issue.
Okay. But I have all the way back to WrestleMania 2. So if you'd like to work a trade for cash, I will trade you cash in the $1 million range for my magazines.
All right,
that's my opening offer.
We'll have to talk about that. Now, you moved out to LA for a while, like you were talking about before. You came back east to work for WWE. Your very first day on the job, I believe, was No Way Out, the No Way Out pay-per-view in 2002. That was the night that Hogan, Hall, and Nash came back as the NWO. What exactly was your job when you first came in, and what do you remember about that night?
Sure. So that was the so Stephanie had taken over creative, so that was 2002. I think she had taken over the year prior. Russo left in 99. She took over sometime in 2000 from Chris Kresge, I guess. I don't really remember the history, but Brian Gewirtz had been there already. So they brought in a bunch of Hollywood writery people, including in a weirdly ironic thing. I told this story on JR's, and if you want to hear the whole story, go listen there. I won't bore Jason because I'm sure he listens to everything I have ever done. Basically, I worked at an agency that Brian Gewirtz's uncle was represented, a guy by the name of Howard Gewirtz. You feel free to look him up. But I didn't meet Brian then. And then I worked with Brian's best friend, this guy named Andy the Giant Gregg, who now works at the NFL Network. He was my writer's assistant. I was a script coordinator on a show called Ladies Man. It was a show that I followed up with friends. He left Ladies Man to go work on the WWE writing team. He then left that job. And then I got hired 6 months later after faxing and emailing my resume about every month. So anyway, I that was sort of how I got there, and I had like a phone interview, and Stephanie flew me out. I met with her assistant, a woman by the name of Jen Unick. Yes, she asked me like, "Well, I'm going to go over some questions, so see how you are as far as knowing the history of the company." She got 2 of the questions wrong. I corrected her. That was awesome. And then I met with Stephanie, and she was amazing. Like, she gets a really bad rap at times, but she's one of the most personable people in the world. She gets that from her mother. She was very nice, very sweet. It was actually the day after her wedding with Triple H, the one where she did the Roar. I don't know if you remember that time period.
Of course.
So literally that was that Tuesday. So I flew there Wednesday. The next day was Valentine's Day, and she hired me on Valentine's Day. And she said, "Great, you have 2 days. You'll be in Milwaukee on Sunday." So I literally flew home on Thursday, packed up my life on Friday, and flew back out Saturday. And 6 years later, I left Connecticut. So anyway, you asked about like what my first day was like. So I was hired as a writer's assistant because they had done all these Hollywood writers, and they got burned. She's like, "Listen, I want to hire you as a writer, but Vince doesn't want to hire any more of these people. They're driving him insane." I believe a tale that would continue for many years, even up to today. And so I was a writer's assistant I was one from February, whatever that was, 17th, until I got promoted 3 months later when they split the writing teams, and I was Paul Heyman's second blah, 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 when SmackDown, the famed SmackDown 6 writing team.
Yeah, well, I want to ask you about that in a second, but I mean, as somebody who's worked around Vince, I guess a fair amount during that time, we hear all these stories about him micromanaging people and working all hours of the day like a maniac, and how it wasn't uncommon for him, I guess, to call the writers at all hours of the night if he had an idea. I guess, as a writer, what was your experience like working for Vince McMahon?
I'll go back to Friends for a second. So when I was on Friends, like we would do, I don't know if anybody knows the production schedule of a sitcom, but you would do like a table read, you'd break for lunch, and then you'd just make changes on the script. When we were at Friends, like we would break for lunch, and the guys would go play video games, and like I would, because it was the writer's assistant, I'd have to stay till we were done, copies were made. I'd get done 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. But we could have cut that time down by about 6 hours if we weren't playing, I don't know what it was called, but it was like World of Warcraft-like game in the 2000s. Anyway, what Vic Levin taught me, get in there, get it done, get the best version. Now, Vince is very particular. He knows what he likes. And by the way, it's his money. So you do what he wants. He's the boss. And I think that's a thing I will always put him over for, is his clear vision of what he wants. Now, does he change his mind? Yes. Does he have a strong grasp of story? No, he doesn't. And I think that's why characters sometimes fail there. So, we would have disagreements, but sometimes he would go with stuff. And it was in those sweet spots that a character like John Cena came up because no one screwed with him. He was just doing his thing. He was doing his character, doing his raps. Nobody messed with it. And then when it started to get over, people started to mess with it. So, the stories are all true, but you have to understand the point of view and perspective of the man and understand a little deeper psychological element to him. He believes in the law of the jungle, and he is the biggest lion in the pride. So he is going to lead by that example.
He hates sickness too, I believe.
Yes. It's the only thing he can't control.
That's true. I guess if somebody's going to sneeze around him, there really isn't a whole hell of a lot you can do about that.
Yeah, that was an early blog post when I had my infamous, ill-famed website, I Want Wrestling.
Ill-fated.
Ill-fated? It was pretty successful. I mean, I wish I still would have stayed there sometimes. But anyway, but I talked about his dislike of sneezing. And Paul Heyman's told the story of he used to Vince would have a competition with his sneeze. He was very angry by his sneezes. So, but hey, everyone has their quirks. By the way, everyone has their quirks. And I always find anyone who tries to knock somebody's quirks has one usually 10 times worse. So.
Now, you mentioned Paul. You worked underneath Paul on SmackDown during that period where, I would argue it was the A show of the company. I'm sure you guys probably felt the same way. You were there through the ascent of John Cena, Eddie Guerrero as WWE champion. What are some of your more positive memories from that period? And I guess also among the talent, who were some of the favorite people to work with?
So I felt like we did well in that period. And Paul was only... I joke with Paul when I speak with him that and I don't know if it's come out or not, but he had a deal where they couldn't get rid of him. So he would do things to piss Vince off and they'd send him home. So, and it worked for him. So, but it happened 3 times, and all 3 times I ended up having to do more work. And he knows that, and we laugh about it, and it's fine. So when he got sent home at No Way Out, 2003. Oh my God, 2003. So long ago. I was 25 or 26, and it was me and Bruce Pritchard who are now in charge of SmackDown. And so, one of the very earliest things was John Cena. It was, John was on the bubble, just like Batista was. They had put some time and effort into them, and we did the ruthless aggression John, and we called him Johnny Boots and Tights because he literally, the only thing that changed every week was his boots and tights. So we did the rap thing on some Halloween show. Seth Mates and I and Paul went overseas, and the famed story of who discovered rapping John Cena, everyone's taking credit for it, but ultimately John put the work into the character, and it was every week him and I'd call him on a Saturday usually and say, all right, you got a match with Funaki. You need a rap and make it about a computer. I'd give him that. He'd come back with the rap. We would shoot it either as a pre-tape, and he would do it. That's how I've always tried to approach stuff. I like writing, so I like writing dialogue for people because I feel like once I know a character's voice, I can write it pretty well, and I can use examples of the last year in Impact. But it's always, here's what I think, but really put it in your voice because you have to say it. And so John was the first one to really use that. JBL was another one. JBL, I remember people scoffed at the idea of JBL as a lead heel, but JBL as a lead heel was to set the table for John Cena. And if JBL only ever did one thing in that company, he did the greatest thing by getting their number one attraction for 10 years ready to be the number one attraction. And that story helped build him, and then they took him to Raw. So that was disappointing. But yeah, Eddie Guerrero is another one. I'm still very good friends to this day with Vicky, and, Eddie was very passionate. And, for Eddie to be believed in, that meant a lot to him. And for somebody and for us to, and by the way, when we pitched the match with Brock, he wasn't supposed to win, but he was getting over. I'm trying to remember when we set that in motion. I think that got set in motion. Did he wrestle the Big Show? There was a shit truck. Yeah, he did the shit truck angle in Hartford, and it was nobody there. And I was like, Vince, can we spray the people with poop? And he said no. That's why they shot it into the fist. Yes, we shot poop into a fist. So that was in that period, October. He started to get over, and we knew he was going to wrestle Brock at that pay-per-view before WrestleMania. And I don't remember I think the plan was always Goldberg, but it's 13 years ago. I remember they did a segment backstage going back even to Survivor Series where Goldberg and Brock were kind of face to face. Even though they were on opposing brands, they came face to face. So I just assume that the plan goes back at least that far. Yeah, I just don't remember if it was going to be for the title or not. I do know that, Brock leaving, and maybe that's when we changed it. I don't remember. Brock leaving goes back to, we were somewhere in Alabama, and I remember him having a talk with Vince. And I don't remember if it was before or after the No Way Out, but I mean, they have a very interesting relationship that I will not spend any time evaluating because I don't want either one of them to kill me. So, but, Eddie was great, but Eddie was one of those people that, it was hard because the SmackDown brand we had a really good, so was that 03 and 04? Like, that's my favorite year of SmackDown. Everyone loves the SmackDown 6. I really love the 03 era because that was the ascension of Cena, the transition of Eddie. We tried with Hardcore Holly. A lot of people really developed really well. We did a wedding and a funeral, with Al Wilson. Seth Mates and I still talk about that to this day. The love affair of Al Wilson and Dawn Marie. I think that was in 03. There's a lot of interesting stuff that if you were to put that on television now, people would freak out. They would freak out at, like, the ridiculousness. Now you're like, oh God, another Apollo Crews Dolph Ziggler match. You know what I mean? Like, if you were to go look at the stuff we were doing in 03 and go look at what they were doing on Raw, it was that time period when I think it was Katie Vick was in 2003, right?
Katie Vick was 02.
Was it?
Yeah, it was
okay.
End of 02.
Then the Al Wilson wedding was 02 and 03. Which this was the original pitch to the Al Wilson funeral. So Dawn would have stooped him to death. Al would have been in the casket. Tori would have been there crying. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have accepted you. I should have been okay with you. Loving Dawn Marie. I'm sorry. I wish I could have one more minute. And then Al was going to sit up in the casket, and he would have faked it. And he would have said, "You're a terrible daughter." And he would have cut this heel promo on his daughter. He would have walked out the front of the funeral home, and then he would have got hit by a bus. And then he would have died. Vince loved it, but we never got to do it, sadly. I never told that story, and probably a reason, because it's terrible.
Would Al have had it in him to cut that heel promo?
He was a heel. I mean, he was terrible, but I think deep down he was a heel. I would have, and it was taped. I mean, it was a weird day because we were like, they were taping. It was one of those days they taped SmackDown on a Sunday. They were at the Meadowlands, and Bruce and I went up to shoot the funeral, and like there was a bump. Anyway, Vince liked this idea of the casket taking a bump, and the stunt guy's like, "Well, there's a chance it could cut his legs off." Okay, let's not do that. And they're like, "No, we got to have the bump. It'll be great. The body will come rolling out," which it didn't. So yeah, Al was a character. I still to this day, when Tori was dating A-Rod, I remember texting her like the Christmas that like A-Rod was at her house in wherever the hell in Boise with her dad, and I didn't know A-Rod was there. And we're just like, oh, she's like, I'm here with my boyfriend. Didn't ask that it was A-Rod. I'm like, well, tell your dad to say hi, and like she sent a picture of her dad, and she still looked like Al Wilson. So, but that was my cross to bear, so to speak. I did every one of those Al Wilson segments, including the shower scene where Dawn Marie's naked, and for some reason Al's in his clothes, which Vince thought was very funny.
Did you have anything to do, now that you bring all that up, I'm just curious, did you have anything to do with the, you get me rolling here on that period, you're bringing back, the floodgates are opening up. The Lunchtime Suicide skits with Tim White and Josh Matthews, did you guys have anything to do with that, or was that just like a .com thing?
Okay, I gotta tell how it happened. So that was was it Orton and Taker? There was like a Hell in a Cell. And we had this idea. And so Tim White's shoulder, like Tim White never reffed after a Hell in a Cell. I think it was with Hunter and Jericho. I think it was actually in Nashville. I remember that day. Now I live here. So anyway, he hadn't reffed since Hell in a Cell. So we had this idea. The show was in Providence. He has a bar in Providence. The pitch was, let's interview Tim White from his bar about how deadly Hell in a Cell is. Simple interview. Vince is like, no. And it was like, what if he's depressed, and what if he kills himself? Okay. Sure. Does he kill himself? Well, no, he'll be fine. And so that's how that thing started. And I think I did like the one where he ate rat poisoning and he fell back in his chair. Josh and I talked about that in the last year or two. I did a couple, and then they got passed off to some other people. Like, they were actually, if you go watch them, they're actually pretty funny. People hated them.
Hey, I enjoyed them. I mean, I still remember. I think there was one where he hung himself. There was one where he took a toaster into the bathtub. I shouldn't have,
they're
but
YouTube, and so it was. I think it actually was the year YouTube came out, and again, I'll bring up Paul because he told me this because I had forgotten this, and so when YouTube started, obviously I'm a big tech guy, including Snapchat today. You know, Snapchat in the 3 or 4. Think about what Snapchat did in 3 or 4 years that pro wrestling hasn't done. You know what I mean? They went from 0 to a $1 billion company. So we all need to figure that out. But when YouTube came out, it was Mark Henry had attacked Batista in a cage, and he climbed up and he couldn't rip open the door on the cage. That was the first wrestling clip that I remember people were passing around on YouTube, and we were like, we should put some of our stuff up on here. And it was like, no, this is terrible. This is going to kill us. Okay. So and TNA actually had the advantage because they actually jumped on it and actually were like the really first wrestling promotion or ahead of WWE on putting stuff on YouTube. And can you imagine if they would have really embraced YouTube? And by the way, all big companies are late to the game on this stuff. Like TNA doesn't even have a Snapchat. WWE has one. They produce content, but in a WWE kind of way. Billy and I went to Musical.ly, which I don't know if you know what Musical.ly is or not. It's an app where you can lip sync songs and make your own music videos. And right now it has 150 million daily users that are between the ages of 9 and 15. Kids don't watch TV anymore. They use this app. And so, like, things change and you got to get ahead of it. So my free tip for any pro wrestler, you want to build an audience that's not 45 years old, get on Musical.ly. But yeah, that period was very weird, but I enjoyed it. But see, by 05, I started to get burnt out on doing SmackDown because at that time, you know, Brian Gewirtz was the head writer of Raw, you know, from 02 or actually all the way back to 2000 through. I mean, when did he get pulled off Raw? It was it 2011, 2012? I mean, he had a massive 10-year run.
Oh yeah, he had a long run.
I had a 4-year run on SmackDown, which is pretty good. You know, 03 to actually you can count 03 to 02 to 2006 when they launched the new ECW and they wanted somebody to work with Paul. So, you know, it just got to be, well, what happens is SmackDown was the whipping boy, and it's funny, it is again in some circles, you know, like when SmackDown moved to Fridays, well, we're taking all your talent. You don't need them. Your show's going to crash. There was a pitch at one point. I think that was the year Cena left. Raw wanted to take Cena, Ray, Eddie, and like 2 other big people. I don't remember who they took. They wanted, and we were going to get back Christian, Muhammad Hassan, and like that was like the trade. That was like the shift.
That seems fair.
Yeah, and you know, thankfully Eddie and Ray were such strong Hispanic draws that was able to appeal to Vince. Said, listen, if you want to keep your Hispanic audience, it's on free television. You know what I mean? We were still on UPN. I think it was still UPN at the time. You know, we were doing huge numbers, and everyone hated that story with Ray and Dominic. That drew huge numbers in that area. So it's just like that was our counter argument. But I had a great team around me. There's a guy by the name of Larry Mullen, who, if you loved Beverly Hills 90210, was a writer on that. He was a man in his 50s at the time, and he was on they wanted him to drive 4 hours between St. Louis and Kansas City, like at 11 o'clock at night. And he told him no. I'm like, he can have my seat on the plane. The man is 55 years old. I said, he doesn't need to be driving late at night. I'll drive. Well, no, you have to be on the plane if Vince wants to go over SmackDown. He doesn't want to go over SmackDown. He doesn't want to talk to me after Raw. So anyway, I liked a lot of the people I worked with. You know, I was still young at the time. I was 28 or 29 at the time. So, you know, it was a lot. I mean, I'm not that age now. Obviously, if you can do math, you can figure out how old I am. You know, I wasn't ready for it, but I got on the job training.
Well, yeah, I mean, so you're a young guy, and at the time, and so you spent some time. Well, hey, come on now. At the time, I mean, you transitioned over. You were head writer for a while on SmackDown. Then they transitioned you over to the ECW brand. I guess that would have been around the time Heyman had his falling out with Vince.
Yeah. No. Well, I see. I had gotten burnt out, and I had a lot of. And Stephanie knew it, and you know, I had a couple blow-ups with Vince. that just were, and by the way, everybody has them. So, she knew I needed to switch, and they were grooming Alex Greenfield, who had worked under me for a year and was very smart. They thought he could be Bryan for SmackDown for 10 years. But he also had confrontations. We all had confrontations with Vince. But so when they launched ECW, Paul just sometimes wouldn't get the work done. They knew I would. So I was there to kind of work with him to make sure formats were done. And, Kevin Dunn had the promos he needed and all that stuff. And Paul lasted on that one for, what was it, June until December? Yeah, it was the ill-fated ECW, which I'm actually happy. People are going back. That Matthew guy from the UK, the Botchamania guy, has been going back and reviewing. He's like, actually, the show was pretty okay. When you go back and actually watch it, it wasn't great. We did the best we could with talent, but I'm really proud of that. I guess it would have been 07 ECW. I was actually really happy with that year. So.
Well, I want to ask you about that because it was obvious that, or at least it seemed obvious to me, that one of the new guys that they were either going to or they should have been building around in ECW was CM Punk. And I know you've written about him in old blogs that you did. And so I wanted to bring this up. And Punk has talked about how there were forces behind the scenes who just did not like him. They tried to sabotage him. I think in one of those blogs, you even wrote that Vince once mocked Punk's little wrist gesture in a production meeting once. What was the knock on him, and how close were they to pulling the plug on him when he was in ECW?
It was pretty tenuous. I mean, I was never in the... That's always creative has nothing for you that talent were told. Like, we never knew if somebody was being let go. Like, it was almost this, there was a Gail Kim story. I remember, like, when Gail got let go in 04, 05, I remember Paul and I were charged with trying to get promos out of her. And Bryan had they shot an angle with her on the Monday that they cut her on the Thursday. Like people would just get cut. So I never knew the actual talent things, but you could always hear rumblings and, he thinks he's an MMA fighter and, it would just be these things. And, at the time, if you go back and look, I mean, if you look at the groundwork that Punk laid in that company, they took a chance on him, and Paul talked about on the DVD, a guy with some buzz. They threw him in OVW, the sort of at the tail end of OVW. Paul protected him as far as, Paul would send up he knew when they were going to relaunch ECW, he wanted Punk. And Paul, even even when we relaunched ECW, he knew he wanted him to debut at the Hammerstein. He knew the reaction would be right. Even to the point where Dusty and I were doing, Punk did 3 or 4 weeks of promos leading up to that debut. Punk's got this thing to him, and I'm not friends with him. I always got along fine with him. Anytime I've ever seen him, he's been very cordial. He's one of those guys that it seems like he had a bad start. So, he's very protective of the people he's protective of, and people that he feels like are trying to use him, he's not very nice to. So, I worked decently with him. I tried to protect him at times. They, at one point, I think in 07, they wanted to draft him to Raw in the Benoit exploding card draft, as I call it. They wanted to draft him that year. I said, listen, he needs another year. I said, he needs a year to be successful. And I think at that point, he hadn't even won the title. I'm like, you're just going to take him and he's going to be here. You know what I mean? Like, he would have been in that before he was in the New Day Kofi zone. You know what I mean? Like, where he was okay, but So, he needed to be successful in ECW, for my opinion, to really have a good year. So that the agents didn't get it, because he wouldn't do what they wanted. He would ask questions. And I think that's an interesting personality type in wrestling, and I think there's a very old guard element to pro wrestling that, these new kids don't know what they're doing. And by the way, I think culture is that way. So he rubbed people the wrong way, and he made a connection with the audience. And the question is what will his impact be over the last, because he hasn't done anything in wrestling in now, 4 years? Does he have value? And I know Eric Bischoff wrote something recently about, should he go to Impact, all that stuff. Like, Punk to me is an interesting thing out there because he's almost virgin snow because he hasn't done anything in wrestling in a long time. Like, when he does something, it'll be really interesting. The question is when and who will want to work with him.
You left WWE in 2008, I believe.
Yep.
Did they give you a reason why they were letting you go?
It was time, and, there was some stuff that we can and can't talk about. And it's just, I was ready to go. I was ready to go when the Benoit thing happened. I was friendly with Eddie, and obviously became friends with his wife. And Chris Benoit was like, you have people that you grow up idolizing, and like, if you ever meet me or will meet me, you'll realize I'll never be a pro wrestler. I have no athletic bone in my body, but you see people that inspire you to like want to do something. And, in successive months, two people that you're very close with die. And I was completely burnt out. I took 4 vacations from that June until literally I was on vacation and let me go. And it's just, I was ready to go. I was actually done with wrestling. I was done. Like, I didn't watch it for months. I think I watched that WrestleMania, the one in Orlando, was the first thing I watched. After that, and like I moved back to LA, like I rushed back to LA. I was just like, I didn't know what I wanted to do because I'd just been so burnt out, and I didn't think I was a good writer anymore, which some people will say I never was, which I'm okay with. And so like I was just kind of ready for a change. So like going back to LA was really important for me because I got back to my friends and I was like, oh wait, I actually do like doing this stuff. And I made a lot of really good connections who to this day, got my affirmation back in wrestling, and like Dave Marquez and Adam Pearce, without them, I would still be out of wrestling. So if you want to blame anybody, blame those two.
You announced in November that you had resigned from your position as senior. Let me make sure I get this title right here: Senior Director of Creative Writing for TNA.
Yes, at some point they made me Senior Creative Director. And I didn't understand what that job was because I know what a creative director does, like an ad agency, and that wasn't. I don't think creative directors at ad agencies write promos for Rosemary. So I always liked Senior Director of Creative because that's what I was hired as.
I was going to say there, are you trying to tell me that TNA didn't quite know what they were doing there?
No, the title change happened because at the time, and I'm even before we started this, I was on the phone with Matt Conway, and I'm really good friends with Matt. Like when the difference between TNA and WWE is light years, and like it or hate it, the Impact show over the last 3 years were me and Matt. John Gabork was our boss, and he would approve stuff, and we'd have to run stuff by him. But everything you saw on the show from basically whenever Bischoff left. There was the weird Russo period, but ultimately, the end of the day at 3:00 in the morning on a Thursday night with 3 more days of Impact taping was Matt and I changing everything. So, I basically said we should have the same title. I was like he's 8 years younger than I am, but like we should be the same. It's only fair. We put in the same amount of work, and at one point I even said just pay us the same. I don't even like to me, once you take that out of the equation, then the other stuff goes away. So that's why that title change happened. And I was hired as director of creative writing, and then I was senior director, and then they were like, "Well, we need to figure out." I'm like, "Just do whatever, but just make sure we're the same." So
when you resigned, I mean, I read the blog post that you put up, which was very nice, and in there you thanked a lot of people. You thanked Vince McMahon and Paul Heyman and Jeff Jarrett, Billy Corgan. No Dixie Carter though, and of course, she's no longer in the mix at TNA. You worked there for 5 years. How would you compare working for Dixie to any of the other folks that you worked with over the years?
Well, I had actually spoken to Dixie before I put that up, so I had spoken to her and thanked her. So she did get thanked, just in a different way. Dixie was, a lot of people say she's a nice woman. I thank her for giving me the opportunity. At the time when I left Ring of Honor, it's ironic. It was very similar timing to now what's happened with Impact. Ring of Honor had new ownership. I had done a lot of really heavy lifting for Ring of Honor that people never knew about. Kerry Sokin's another person that doesn't get enough thanks, and especially for me at times. And, if Kerry wouldn't have rubber stamped me to come work at Ring of Honor, I probably, again, would be out of wrestling. So, again, blame Kerry. But, when Ring of Honor got sold, the people that took it over and became friends with Joe Koff, so there's no heat there. I was doing a lot of the digital social for Ring of Honor at a time when there was no budget for anything, and I really wasn't figured in to the new company. Like, everybody had jobs and titles and salaries, and I was sort of left with what's left. And so when Jeff Jarrett called me, ironically enough, he called me it was the first day that Sinclair technically owned the company. I was uploading the Best in the World press conference we had done, which I was like, can we live stream it? They're like, no, we're streaming it to the stations, but we'll put it up on the internet later. I'm like, okay. It didn't air on any stations. I was like, oh, okay. I said, we can live stream it on this thing. I think it was Justin TV at the time. I don't remember exactly what I wanted to stream it on, but I wanted people to be able to watch this press conference live. I was uploading it. It took 6 hours for some reason. And I was on Jeff Jarrett, the first time I ever spoke to him. And he said, hey, would you like to come do this thing in India? Like, I don't know. Well, it depends. Make me an offer. And at the time, ROH hadn't made me an offer. So, I flew out to meet Dixie in September with Jeff. And, they made me an offer. And Ring of Honor sort of matched it, but didn't. And, I thank them because it changed my life. Again, I think people sit and wait for change to happen. And you sometimes have to decide to make change. I could have stayed at Ring of Honor and I would have had a job and I probably would have done well and helped them in places that they didn't do well or maybe kept it the same, but I needed to change. And I came to Nashville and my life is completely different. And, I thank her for that. And she did. And did she make mistakes? Yes. I don't know if she'll ever do an interview, and I think she would say she made some mistakes. She did the best she could for what she had. And I say this line, she's the reason we were there, and she's also the reason we're here. And ultimately the last year sucked. But here's the thing. The business sucked last year, but last year was the most fun I've ever had doing any creative in any wrestling company in 15 years. So we just made the best of it. And, ask any of the talent who did it. They worked really hard with no future. And they all really enjoyed it. And that's, people used to make fun of TNA morale and all that stuff. But when you don't know what your future is going to be, at least you can have fun in the moment you're doing that. And we always used to stress that with talent. And they went out and killed it. And I don't need to run the laundry list, or we can talk about it. But so much good was done last year that nobody saw.
TNA's made quite a bit of news this week. Drew Galloway, the Hardys leaving the company, among others. I would imagine in your position there, you must have worked with them a lot. What do you think of those guys, and what do you think of this whole broken universe that Matt has created for himself?
Well, that's the good part of last year, and the same with Drew. Like, we worked with talent, and it's funny. A picture popped up in my Facebook time hop thingy they have. Like, I had completely forgot Big Money Matt. Like, think about that. Big Money Matt was really cool. Like, he did a really great character, and that just got wiped out last year. Nobody remembers that. It was like Rebby and Spud and Tyrus. Like, he had this really cool thing last year that in any other year would have been a spectacular character, and he was really good at it. We got to this point in the story with Jeff. We did the I Quit thing, and it was just this idea we had. And again, idea. It was like, what if you just went dark? And it was just until you beat your brother again, you went dark. That's where it started, and you saw where he took it. And JB did a lot of great work with him, and Jimmy did a lot of great work. This guy Ben, everybody pitched in, and that's the thing. It's no one singular person, and that's when it's really good. Is when people are throwing ideas. Billy Corrigan went to Cameron, North Carolina for Delete or Decay, and stayed up all night with them. Like, these people just worked all hard as a team. I mean, JB and Jimmy would edit all night, especially when we had short turnarounds. Like the Bound for Glory match. They shot some of that stuff the night before, and they were up all night editing to make sure it made the match. That's what's being different about wrestling is pushing things. And I love the term old school, but newspapers were old school. And they still exist, and they're great. But you have to also adapt to new technology and new things that are changing and new forms of storytelling. So, I enjoyed it because it was everybody trying new things. I gave Matt the suggestion after he lost at Slammiversary. I was like, what if you take your phone, go on Facebook, and you just streamed all night, you just sitting in bed awake? Now, granted, he didn't end up doing all night, but if you go back and people remember this ridiculous Facebook promo, he just stood there and chomped his thing for 10 minutes and looked at the camera and freaked out. And it was different because it was a reactionary moment on Facebook that was live, and he was willing to take the chance, and it was just enhancing the story that somebody had maybe watched. More people actually, I think, watched the live stream than watched the pay-per-view. So, I like people that are willing to try new things in new arenas while also working in the traditional. And Matt and his brother Jeff would do that.
Now, let me ask you. You kind of answered the question I was going to ask, but I'll ask it anyway because I'm curious what your response is. But when you have somebody like Matt, who it seems like has a fair amount of creative freedom to, kind of mold and shape that character any which way he wants to, as a writer, as somebody in your position, do you look at that and say, I want more of that. This is great. Like feed me more, or is it the opposite? And I'm not saying this is specific to the Hardys, but just kind of in general, because there's been so many guys who have come and gone in WWE, for example, just to use them, who have said, I pitched ideas all the time and they just would go nowhere. I would get stonewalled. It was like they almost resented the fact that I was trying to help out and pitch ideas. It's interesting. I mean, some people, it seems like, embrace it, and other people almost resent it if you're a writer who's being pitched different ideas by the talent.
And you have to look at each system is completely different. So, I mean, I'm not going to judge anything that's happening in Impact now because I know nothing about the system. And I can say at WWE, people would pitch, you have to understand, it's like some people would pitch ideas that are like, I beat The Undertaker. Okay. It's got a great beginning, middle, and end. And great. You go tell Undertaker you want to beat him at WrestleMania. Go ahead. You got to have a real compelling reason. And, the same way that, I would never tell someone how to wrestle a match, but I can give my input on what I think the story of the match is, just like a wrestler, if they give input on the story, and by the way, it's a collaborative thing. So, but some people would get very hurt if their idea wasn't used. But Jericho's a very collaborative person. I didn't work a lot with Chris, but he would work with Brian Gewirtz on every one of his promos. That's why you hear those stories when a guy walks up and they hand him a promo, they rip it up, or they're like, no, work with me on it. And Jericho and actually Brian, if you haven't listened to Brian Gewirtz, I think he was on Jericho's podcast. I forgot how much I enjoyed listening to Brian and being around him, because he's very dry and very funny. And there's some great stories in there, like he pitched Candice Michelle that she didn't have a tongue. And I think he was half serious, but it's still very funny. And it's one of my, I'm on a plane listening to this podcast, laughing my ass off, and people think I'm nuts. You have to understand, you have 50 characters in your head, all who want to be the champion. They all want to be the best at something, and they never want to lose. Like they never want to look bad. And I don't know if have you seen the Lego Batman movie?
I saw the Lego movie. I have not seen the Batman movie.
Okay, so when you see the Lego Batman movie, or if you've seen it, imagine that as John Cena. And would they have ever put John Cena's character in that position to have the amount of flaws? Basically, the Batman's a self-centered babyface that doesn't take ideas from anybody. And I enjoyed the hell of the movie. A college friend of mine, Seth Graham-Smith, wrote it. And it's a really strong, well-written movie that you could take the Lego and you take the Batman. It's a story about family and this guy that literally lost his. It's the Batman story, so there's no spoilers. He lost his family and he got to save the world, but he had no family to share it with. And what's that like for him? Tell me the last WWE story that had any form of level of that.
I can't think of
exactly. That's what I mean. That's where here's the Hardy story. The Hardy story goes all the way back to a year before, and they told it. Matt and Jeff finally win the one tag team titles they had never won, the Impact tag team titles, and Jeff breaks his leg. And Matt comes back, and he's got nothing. Literally, we didn't have anything for Matt because we had all this stuff blocked out. Little known trade secret, we at one point pitched Matt Hardy joined the BDC, and then the BDC imploded when Hernandez and all this stuff. So Matt literally disappeared from TV for like 3 to 4 weeks. And we had to figure out a new story. And then the World Title Series happened. Matt was, the way we shot that, it was to get to the Final Four. Matt actually won, I believe, the original finish of the World Title Series that we shot before we actually shot the TVs. And we told the story of Matt was going to become champion. Think about the thing. Matt Hardy never really became world champion. You can say that ECW run or whatever. This story. And then, he gets it taken away, and then he comes so close. And we told this really epic story with Matt Hardy that was really well done, and Rebby and Spud and Ethan, and we flipped those two characters. It was a really well done story. And it helped grow their characters. And yeah, the Broken Universe is great, but I don't know if it would have I think people were entertained by it, but the base story that led to it, I think, was equally as good. And then they took it to a whole nother level with the final deletion. I mean, when I saw the final deletion, I was in tears. It was the most insane thing I ever saw, and it was at least different, and different's good. And would you want a 2-hour wrestling show of that? No, but it was at least different, and it caught people's attention, and it went from 310,000 viewers to 410,000 viewers in a July 4th week. Like that's the other thing. That show aired on July 5th. There was no promotion for it except we sent it around to a bunch of people that watched it, and we put videos of other people watching it. And that was the promotion. And people got so jazzed seeing like 3 shots and people's reactions to it that you wanted to see it. And that was an interesting way to use no budget marketing to get people to pay attention to something. And again, it was a team effort for that.
What would you say are some of the common misconceptions people have about writers in wrestling and the role they play?
They're tremendous lovers. No, they think we're stupid. Like we don't know anything about the business. Like Matt Conway is like I am, like a 20-year wrestling fan. He went to shows so if you love the original Double J vignettes in Nashville, Matt's dad is mentioned in those vignettes. Go back and listen. Like Tony Conway is his father, so like Matt grew up a wrestling fan. I think that's the misconception that we're not fans. Now, by the way, I worked with a bunch of people who weren't fans at WWE, and they didn't last very long. And, because it doesn't make sense to anybody who's not a fan. I'm trying to think of other misconceptions. It's hard. I had a pretty good run. I mean, 15 straight years with some time on and off here or there. Like, it's really a hard job, and I think a lot of people think they could do it, but there's like a Olympic dive. There's a lot of different things that go into it. There's a degree of difficulty with the travel. The things they threw at Matt and I in the last 3 years. Okay, guys, you're gonna do. You're gonna go to the UK, and you're gonna do 6 impacts in 3 days with 6 hours of travel between each, and double taping days. So we would be pretty good about getting formats done, but changes happen. So I'm rewriting show 3 between night 1, and it affects all the shows, so we're playing catch up. And it's not like we just book matches. I think sometimes you watch Raw and it's just like they just booked matches. We had a lot of stuff that interconnected. So there was a lot of work that went into it, and I think people would not be able to do it. Like I want to do a fantasy writer camp one day and throw at everybody all the crazy stuff that happens in the job. If you think you can do it, great, go do it. You know what I mean? There's plenty of independent promotions or people that start it so they can be writers, but until you have to really work for Vince or work in an environment that you have to do 7 shows in 4 days in a soundstage with people that literally I don't know where they go at night because I think they live in that soundstage. So yeah, it's a very hard, and it's a very niche job. It's not like there's a minor league to learn how to write wrestling or produce wrestling. There are only probably 9 to 15 full-time wrestling writer jobs in the world. There's no college for it.
During your time in TNA, Billy Corgan joined the company. He had his own vision for where he wanted to take it. A lot of the wrestlers online seemed pretty enthusiastic about it. Didn't come to pass. Had he stayed on, would you have done the same, or did his departure not really have anything to do with your decision to leave?
They influenced. I would have take Billy out. If Billy never would have went to TNA and the same situation would have happened, I would have left. Meaning the ownership change happens, no communication about what's happening, and I'm told, there's going to be new people. I'm like, who's my boss? Nobody would tell me. It's like, how can I make a decision about my future without knowing what my future is? Now put Billy back in. Billy and I have been friends for years before he came to TNA. Like Matt Conway, he's a wrestling geek. He grew up watching Dick the Bruiser in Chicago with his grandparents. Now, see, Billy had actually never gone to a lot of wrestling shows as a kid because he didn't grow up with much, so he only ever watched it on TV. And I think he actually didn't start going to wrestling shows until 1999 because he was a little busy with that band, the Smashing Pumpkins. You may have heard of them. So we were wrestling geek friends. We would send, messages back and forth talking about stuff and see each other at shows. But, when he came onto the team, he had ideas. And here's the thing. He wasn't one of those people that would like come in and just, no, you can't do that. You can't. It was like, what about this? What about this? He fit in really well into the dynamic that we had at the time. And you'd have really good notes. And it wasn't like snarky, like, well, that guy will never get over. Like none of those notes. So we all got along really well. So when he got more and more involved and he started to invest more and more money, I got closer with him. And, I spent a lot of time on the phone talking not creative with him, from when he became president until the day he was fired. I learned a lot about a lot of people that work in that company, saw a lot of things, and a lot of people do a lot of not good things to other people. And it was disappointing. So it led to my decision because I could probably still be there. I don't know. I mean, but to walk away from a well-paying job with no promise of anything was a very hard decision. But I did it because I wanted to do something different. And, I hung up with Dixie and got a phone call. Hey, can you be in Chicago on Wednesday? There's a client that needs a documentary piece done on them. And I, by the way, had lightly started shooting and editing again, but like, sure, I took it. So I went up and did pieces for Ringling Brothers. I did not the Harlem Shake. What was the thing that was the Mannequin Challenge thingy with that song in November? I shot one of those, and then I did documentary pieces. And, Billy and I obviously keep in touch. We talk every day. And he's like, well, I'm going to start doing some music stuff with stuff. Well, you want to do it? And we still have a large love of wrestling, and we're still investigating it. But so it's like a loaded question. Yes, I left with him, but I left on my own reasons. And yet we are still together. I'm about to take a 5-day train trip with him on his 50th birthday from Chicago to LA, and we're going to document it. And we're going to do it in a way that's unique and different in 2017.
Well, let's get into it right now. I want to talk about this 30 Days project, where basically the premise for people who don't know is you guys would travel the country, no particular destination in mind, just sort of taking suggestions on places to visit. He chose you to pile into an RV with him and film him on the road for 30 days straight. I know the series recently concluded. People can find all the videos on the official Smashing Pumpkins YouTube channel. I encourage you all to do so. I assume he came to you, he pitched the idea. I guess what was your thought when this was first presented to you?
Yeah, so it goes back to, he said it was 10 months ago. So I think it was like March or April of last year. So there's a wrestler by the name of Josephus. He wrestled in Global Force and a bunch of other places. He looks like Bruiser Brody a little bit. He had gone around the United States with him, and they did like some social pop-ups, and Billy wrote some music on that trip that ended up now as part of his acoustic album that's coming out, or a solo album that's coming out later this year that he produced with Rick Rubin, who is a huge wrestling fan as well. And so he loved that trip so much because he got inspired. And I was like, I think, we're trying to come up with like a first project to do digitally. Because what we've learned is, and, we've been sort of advised over the last by 6 or 7 months by a guy by the name of Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V, if you don't follow him on Twitter. He has a daily vlog he does. He has a cameraman by the name of D-Rock who follows him around, and literally he's in Hamburg, Germany right now, and he was in Detroit yesterday. Like, he documents how hard his day is. So, I suggested to Billy, I'm like, well, if you're going to do the road trip, I said, let's do videos every day. He's like, what, like Facebook? I'm like, let's do everything. I bought a pair of spectacles. I have a DSLR. We did Facebook Live videos, and it was like, we'll just do it every day. We didn't even have a name. Like, by the way, the 30 Days name we came up with on day 0. Like, we didn't even have a title for it. He's like, what do you want to call it? I don't know. He's like, what if we just call it 30 Days? It's what it is. Okay. And that's the thing is like every day we would just riff on stuff and just do it and try it. Like I would sit down to edit after we shot, and I'm like, I have no idea what this day is going to be like. Like I shot it, but I didn't know what the feel of it was until we would sit down. And that was terrifying, because if it's not good, it's my fault. It's not Billy's fault. You know what I mean? He did everything he could on that day. So we just went and did it. And, every day is a little different. And what I like about it is you don't have to watch one day to get another. So like, it's like you can, I'll just watch this day. And, some days are really good. Like one day we were in, I think, we're at a train museum in Galveston. And, then we did a live broadcast from a beach. And this couple, 20 minutes after we did the live thing, literally found the RV we were in and chased us down. We had stopped to like find where we're going next. And I have it. This couple runs up and they're like, "Oh my God, it is you." And the guy's like, "I got my guitar. Are you still going to play?" And Billy, I didn't put this in the video, he goes, "You want to record this?" I'm like, "Fuck yeah." I mean, like Billy has this impact on people because of his music. I mean, he has a 30-year legacy of playing music that touched a lot of people. And that to me was the magic of it. One-to-one, somebody meeting somebody that had an impact on somebody's life. Take the music out, take Billy out. Can you imagine if you did that every day? You went and actually like interacted with somebody and changed their life or did something good for no benefit other than just doing it. And that's what I got out of the project, is seeing Billy interact. So Billy could have said, "Nah, we're just going to go." He sat and gave that kid advice. And to me, it's the most profound advice in the entire piece. The kid's like, "Well, I got a band. I want to make it. How can I make it?" And it's something that every pro wrestler, and I'm not shy about saying this, he's like, going and playing a show in front of 20 people is not going to get you very far. You have to build a following. You have to build a thing, and you got to do it digitally, because right now, and you do a podcast, if you were to sit and do the same interview in a restaurant and invite a bunch of people, it wouldn't reach as many people as it's there. And I learned this in 2011 with my podcast that people still ask me about on a weekly basis. When you create something that people enjoy listening to, watching, or whatever, you really get something different. And I think that's where people lose it in wrestling. Like, they just think it's matches and there's moments. Like, when you make people feel something, that's the sweet spot. Doesn't matter what you get paid, when you really can make an audience feel something and connect. And like, that's what I got out of the project. And that's what we tried to capture every day. So like, that day was cool. The day in Laredo was cool. The day in Taos was one of the best days of my life.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, I've watched all 30 episodes. I told you this privately.
Thank you for spending 4 hours with it. So.
Well, it took me a little while. I mean, I couldn't go through it all at once, but I didn't want to blow it all because I knew there was only a finite number. But I told you this privately. I mean, I enjoyed the hell out of them, and I'm torn. It's funny you mentioned those two, because I'm torn on the Laredo episode and the Taos episode on which one is my favorite. But basically, it's just like you were saying, just to, give people a sense. I mean, Billy would just show up in these different places, and he would start playing in a public place. It could be outdoors, it could be indoors. You would start broadcasting on Facebook Live, and people would just gravitate. They would show up. You have other episodes, though, where you're walking through these downtown areas with little mom and pop shops that look abandoned, and all these little towns in middle America that have just been left behind. What was your favorite episode of all of the ones, if you could kind of isolate it down to one?
I have one that it's called Lost But Found. The one where it starts where we're literally wandering around in the dark somewhere in Texas, because we literally were wandering around in the dark, and he was looking for a cemetery. It wasn't important. He's like, "Where are we?" And earlier in that day, we had found this great, I didn't want to shoot the sunset because 30 straight sunsets it's whatever. But when I tried to shoot it differently every day, and we got to this point where the sky was purple, but it was only purple in my camera. It wasn't purple to the naked eye. It just looked amazing. And I didn't do any camera tricks. It's just the way the lens looked. And he's like, "I got a promo." Okay, cool. Say it. And he gives this really profound thing. I'm not going to even mess it up right now. And it fit the theme of the episode. And so later in the night, we're wandering around, lost but found. And I think a lot of us are lost. I know this is way too deep for a pro wrestling podcast. And if they've gone this far, then they're in for the ride at this point. But, I think a lot of us are really lost, and we let our brains take us in places about things that don't matter. And we worry about, oh, they're jobbing out fucking Dolph Ziggler. Okay. It's a show. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what's the real reason you're so upset about Dolph? Do you equate with the fact that you're in a job that you don't get to be a part of? Like, once you wipe that all away and like you go into, like you said, middle America and you see these places, like I swear we saw, it's at the end of like the third episode, that house that's just kind of caved in, and like I saw 1,000 of those houses abandoned and just caved in, and people just left them there. And there, again, 1,000 in 30 days. I saw about 1,000 of those houses just across America, boarded up, all this stuff. You don't see that on the news. You don't see like these towns left behind, and the Yazoo and the Delta Blues one, like that downtown that they've painted and nobody goes there. And then you meet this guy that, you know, talks about how horrible the VA is. Everybody's got these great stories. And when you get to that level, and you and one thing I didn't shoot was a conversation between Billy and I. And obviously, you know, Billy's politics come up at one point, and, you know, the media jumped all over and it became clickbait headlines and all this stuff. But just sitting and talking with somebody about a subject over a meal, or without the public scrutiny of somebody jumping in. Can you imagine having a conversation like you and I would have on Twitter, and like people being able to jump in? You're stupid. That's a dumb opinion. Like, what world do we live in? Like, how is this a conversation now? But you sit down across from somebody one-to-one, it's much differently than on an online, you know, Twitter, Facebook. You know, there's this wall of anonymity, and you get out in the country and you see what these people are going through, and it's just, I mean, it was, I hate to use the word life-changing, but it was, because what does it matter? What does having a lot of money matter if you're not happy? You know what I mean? Like, and you're stuck in your head. So I learned a lot, and again, very deep for a pro wrestling discussion. But I mean, like, those are the discussions I have with people now. I don't really worry about how Dolph Ziggler's booked anymore. It doesn't matter to me. Like, and that's the stories I like telling. And if I can tell that in a wrestling world, great. If not, I'll find something else to do.
Well, you were talking before about the sunsets and everything. I wanted to mention, you know, Sedona, Arizona, I think was one of the places that you guys went to or passed through. I have to say, you know, I've never set foot in Arizona before, but that place looks absolutely majestic. I would love to go there one day.
I would recommend Sedona, and then it's a little off the beaten path, and it was I don't know if it's the worst drive. Actually, no, I'm trying to remember what the day is. We drove to Monument Valley, which is technically in Utah, but in Arizona, where they shot all the Westerns. So I cut you off. I don't know if
No, that's okay. I can't remember if it was Arizona where they filmed those desert scenes for Breaking Bad, or if it was New Mexico. I can never figure out.
It was New Mexico.
It was New Mexico.
It's New Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: what was the craziest thing you saw, or the craziest thing that you experienced over the course of those 30 days? I mean, was it the mirror on the RV on the bridge?
That was
for those who don't know, Billy hates bridges. Everyone, okay? He is not a fan of bridge. Hopefully, that doesn't include Jeff Bridges, but he is not a fan of bridges, and he had a little incident in one of the episodes.
Yeah, it was very early. So we went to Metropolis, Illinois, which is only like 2 hours from here, and they've adopted it as Superman's hometown. But that's actually one of my really favorite episodes. That's where is it me or does this look like EC3 started? And by the way, that's my cat I think it's in that episode as well. That's my cat Harley, that he thinks looks like EC3 as well. But yeah, we were leaving Metropolis, and Billy, like, again, I shouldn't have been rolling, but Billy's like, this is a really, really cool bridge. You should shoot it. So I pull my iPhone up and I start rolling, and then literally 10 seconds into it, the mirror, which just got knocked off. And I still to this day don't know how he did it, because he wasn't that close. The bridge was narrow, and we lost the mirror. And by the way, that was day 3. We never replaced the mirror. He literally duct taped a new mirror that we bought from an AutoZone. And like, he's like, do you have to shoot this? I'm like, yes. Yeah, it's like, I figured we would get the mirror changed. I'm like, and it became a theme, and the mirror became a character. Like the mirror became a character in the thing, and you would always sort of see it, and it was like this battle scar. And again, it's again, don't want to get too deep, but it was, you know, it was really interesting. But that also, the reason we were in that town was his grandmother, who, and again, I've known Billy for 6 or 7 years, and I learned so much about him in doing the documentary. His grandmother, who had a large cultural impact on his life, you know, he talks about his relationship with his father, but his grandmother, Lillian, you know, had a huge impact, and she lived in that town. So going there was important, and it was almost, get into energy and spirit again, things way above a normal pro wrestling discussion. But it was almost interesting that it happened leaving that town, because it was almost like this, like, pay attention, this is important. And then that same day we went to his grandmother's grave, and he hadn't been there since they put the gravestone down. And as we're walking up, like, we saw this owl just sitting there. I know it's kind of funny because of owls and they're now placement in pro wrestling. But this owl was there, and then Billy tells the story of when his son was born, there was an owl outside the window. So it was very interesting that this owl was, owls are common, but it was just very weird that happened. So days like that and things like that were really kind of, again, we didn't script the owl. The owl was just there. So just like the mirror.
Well, we'll wind down here a little bit, but I want to ask you about this. I see you tweeting a lot about branding and marketing and the rise of digital streaming and that sort of thing. There was something you posted, actually, I think it was a few days ago, that caught my eye about the increase in the number of Netflix subscribers over the last 5 years.
Yep.
I know you saw the announcement. YouTube just announced the launch of their own TV service. In terms of pro wrestling, what does the future look like? I mean, WWE has slowly been growing their network. The numbers may not be exactly where they want them to be, but they're getting there. How different does the business look to you 5-10 years down the road?
I wish I had a crystal ball. Lay the WWE network numbers next to the Netflix numbers. Let's go ahead and do that. I was actually surprised. I didn't realize how they doubled in, I think it was like 2013. Like, they were at 33 million. Do you remember that day that Netflix announced Quickster, the DVD? Like, remember people, they pronounced that company dead.
Oh, they freaked out.
Dead on. And it's, I bring this up because and even to a Snapchat today, like, everyone's like, oh, it's going to be great. Like, I'm not as bullish on Snapchat because I don't understand it. And granted, I'm 40 something. But like these things come and go, and you can't, like, I can't tell you today what's going to be here. You have to almost use reverse logic. You can almost look at Netflix when that day of the DVDs, everyone writ them off, just like when Facebook would change the algorithm, and everyone's like, oh, I hate Facebook now. But they're doing it to do what's best for not only the business but the consumer. And what Netflix did was they saw a gap in the marketplace, and Hollywood is a very broken system, meaning that, if you want to get a television show made, good luck. Same with a movie. And it's gotten worse. And I learned that when I was there. And, in 96 to 2000, when I was in Hollywood, it was much different. You wanted to be like, when I was in sitcoms, that was the golden land. If you created a sitcom, you were set for life, because these little green envelopes come that they just send you money for things you wrote years ago. Imagine getting a really like a nice check when somebody, like, you get a small residual on a pre-roll ad on a YouTube thing, but the golden Hollywood of residual checks showing up for nothing, those days are dwindling down. Like, Netflix doesn't give residuals. Like, that's a change that's coming. You know what I mean? So I think the difference is you got to, and it goes back to Billy. You got to be in control of your own story. And that's, and I put that in my goodbye statement with TNA and all this stuff. Like, and I'm not a brand. Like, the content I create usually for other people, but everything I tweet is what I believe. And I believe that you need to be taking care of yourself. Like you do this podcast. It's great. You should be making video content too. And I don't know what that is. And again, I'll bring up Gary Vee for a second time. And Gary is a very interesting person. You will watch him and you will hate him the first time you watch him, because he's very upfront, very forward. But then when you kind of seep into it, he says, don't create, document. If you got an interesting life, document it. If you have a boring life, but do it with a way that sells your story. And pro wrestlers have this. Pro wrestlers have great lives. Or they have interesting lives. They travel, they do stuff. They're in a profession that people don't understand. There's this mystery to it, and there's like this weird culture that covers it. But then, like what's the most interesting part of pro wrestling? What happens behind the scenes? What's the most interesting thing you don't see? What happens behind the scenes? But everybody knows it's fake, but yet everybody wants it to be the real stuff to be on television, but then they wouldn't watch it on it's this weird parable of story that I haven't figured out. So you ask what the future is. It's it's the same thing that happened in 1984. It's taking compelling characters and putting them in arenas that people want to watch them in. So, for example, what did Vince McMahon do well? He took very compelling characters from all different territories and put them on nationally syndicated television. What was successful for Eric Bischoff in WCW? He took well-known characters and put them on cable television in a new way. So WWE's got a closed network. I mean, they have, 1.8 million people worldwide. I mean, that's like, how many wrestling fans? I mean, at some point in 2000, 98 to 2000, there were 10 million people watching wrestling on a Monday night. And people cycle through. So you just got to get to them in a different way. And, I love Twitter. I met you on Twitter. I have followers on there. I don't like it anymore because it's like, I get it. I use it for news, but to me, it doesn't have the same value it used to have. And I don't get the engagement it used to have. Things change. Like Facebook isn't going anywhere. Twitter, I don't think will go anywhere. I just think it's got to pivot. Just like, I don't know if you're on Instagram. Instagram has pivoted really, really hard this year. They stole stuff from Snapchat. They have a live thing. Like, there, to me, if you're a wrestler on there, you should be figuring out how to hack that in a way that grows your business. And I believe all wrestlers can be social media influencers. If you don't know what that is, figure it out, because brands, so with DVRs, people fast forward through stuff. Brands will come to you and they will, if you can get them views on their product in a non-salesy way and it makes them give a good impression, that will make money for people. So, and it's a very ethereal, what's the future of wrestling, but I think it's in goodwill. I'm not a horrible person. You know what I mean? Like, I will talk with anybody. Like, I enjoy the hell out of your tweets and all that stuff. When I left TNA, you had a really funny tweet, so I reached out to you. If I enjoy somebody in discussion, people that used to tweet me horrible stuff, I hate the term slide into DMs, but I like talking to. And a lot of those conversations, I like we're humans and we should discuss. I believe we need to be better about connecting with the audience. Now, again, pro wrestling is a work. I know, I'm sorry if you haven't figured it out by now. If you've gone an hour into this thing and you're just finding out, I'm sorry. And Santa Claus, he's a good dude. But what the connection is important. And I was reading, I don't know if you know who Tim Ferriss is, but Tim Ferriss just came with a book called Tools of Titans. And there's a chapter in there about 1,000 true fans. And it says if you have 1,000 true fans who enjoy what you do and they pay you $100 every year, you can live a very good life. If you're a pro wrestler, think about it. Do you have 1,000 true fans? People that will buy your buy 4 T-shirts or spend $100 on you every year. Find those. I mean, think about it. Could you live on $100,000 for the rest of your life every year?
I can.
You could. Yeah. You can live on 50. If you're smart. I did not make a lot of money in Ring of Honor. I made good money for the days I worked. It was the least amount of money ever made, but somehow I got out of $13,000 of debt that I had accrued through my WWE period because I was smarter. What do you need money for? If you're happy, what makes you happy? And one last 30 days mention, like, I would move to Taos, New Mexico tomorrow if I could and just live out in the woods or like live in a cabin and be perfectly happy with a life like that and finding stuff that allows me to be creative. Like, that's good for me. Or go to one of these small towns and just, I don't know, run a shop and connect with people because, and that's the thing is we're spending all of our time worrying about what Bill in fucking Oklahoma tweets about Dolph Ziggler. Like, who cares? We're in a war of opinions. So I believe the value is in connecting one-to-one and not working people, but working with them.
Been getting a lot of that this week with this Beth Phoenix Hall of Fame announcement. I've reached a point where it's like, just everybody just calm down. It's really not that big of a deal.
I'll tell you why Beth should be in the Hall of Fame. And I tweeted it and she was nice enough to like the tweet. I met Beth Phoenix in 2002. The night that Al Wilson and Dawn Marie were in the shower, 3 women had a tryout at WWE. One was Gail Kim, who got hired. The other one was Tracy Brooks, who didn't get hired but went on to have a career in TNA. And the third was Beth Phoenix. Johnny Ace was interested in Gail, was interested in Tracy, and not interested in Beth at all. It was like, I remember we were in this small little room and they were doing promos and he was paying attention to the other two. And, you know, it was 2002. Beth, on her own dime, moved to OVW, not with a contract, but went to OVW, trained in those things, worked very hard to get a contract. Very hard. And again, even when she started, you were like I remember she started like, it'll be okay. I never did a lot of her creative. Like she was just on Raw and all that stuff. But she worked really hard. And I know that's like, oh, you shouldn't go in the Hall of Fame. But she had a very big impact in that period. And like, to me, it's worth celebrating. Like, she has a great story. And, you know, and she has made a great life for herself. And to me, she's pivoted into a life. I think she's getting a master's degree or she's she's doing stuff like where she's improving herself. Like, that's a great story. Like she's made a life of herself outside of wrestling. That should be celebrated. Not how many fucking titles did she win or how many stars she accumulated in matches. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's an overall package. Like, and she's one of the nicest people I've ever met, and there isn't anyone more deserving.
Before we end, I have to ask you this. Favorite Smashing Pumpkins song?
Today. I mean, and that story, you want to look at clickbait. So I set Billy up with a woman by the name of Amy Jo Martin to do an interview. It's in one of the later episodes. I think we were actually in Sedona. And, you know, Billy tells the story of the inspiration that led to it. And he talked about, like, what it was. And the clickbait headline, how the success of Nirvana almost drove Billy to suicide, which is, he didn't say it all. He just was like, the first album had done well, but, you know, he was at this point wondering, what's the point of all this? And, you know, Today is a lot of people's favorite song. And you listen to it, and it's watching him work. And I got to be, and I couldn't share a lot of it. He works harder on his music than I ever thought was possible. Like, when we would be at hotels, separate hotel rooms, we'd always, 9 times out of 10, would have the room next to each other. I'd wake up at 6:30 in the morning, and I'm like, I hear someone playing guitar. And I'm like, what, that person's? Oh, it's Billy. Like, he gets up at 6:30 every morning and is just working. Like, that is a commitment. And that's where that song, like, you know, he was in a bad place mentally, and he figured it out. He meditated. He did whatever was necessary to lead to a good piece of inspiration that today people still talk about that song. So I'm not going to judge like, oh, this is the better song. But to me, the inspiration that led to that song, and I can talk about, and I won't, like, moments in my life that led to really good moments of creative or moments of happiness and all that stuff. And like, to me, that's like that song becoming as popular as it was because it was such a turning point in his life. That's why it's my favorite song. What's yours?
I would go with Disarm.
Disarm's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you can watch the entire 30-day series on the Smashing Pumpkins YouTube channel, all shot and directed by Dave himself. Let people know how they can contact you, follow you.
So, yeah, if you haven't heard of me, I'm sorry, because I'm brilliant. I'm tremendous and very not humble. No, my Twitter is @Lagana. I have a Facebook fan page if you want to follow me on that. I get weird friend requests all the time. I will not add you to my personal Facebook if I haven't met you, talked to you in 6 months, or unless you send me $100. And then on Snapchat and Instagram, it's DJ Lagana, because somebody has grabbed Lagana and they don't use it, and it makes me very angry. My email's on my Twitter. I think it's davidjlagana@me.com. Again, very, very egotistical here. So I will. You can reach out anytime.
Awesome. Dave, thanks for the time. This was fun. And thank you guys for listening. Hit the subscribe button, like this video, leave some love in the comment section. I will be back again soon with a brand new extra. So until then, be well, stay safe, and we will see you back here again real soon. Take care, guys.